Ada Boone buried her husband on a Tuesday in October of 1936, up on a ridge in Harlan County, Kentucky, ground still soft enough to dig by hand. Wednesday morning, before the frost lifted off the porch boards, she lit the stove herself. Nobody helped her split the kindling. The mine that killed her husband didn't send flowers, didn't send a check, didn't send anybody at all. She had a cast-iron box stove, 40 acres of second-growth hickory out back, and a boy named Wesley who'd just turned 11 the week before. That winter came in hard. By January, the thermometer nailed to the porch post read 11 below, and it stayed there for the better part of a week. Down the hollow, a bookkeeper who'd switched his family over to a brand-new oil-burning furnace back in 1934 ran clean out of fuel money by the middle of that month. He packed up his wife and kids and moved in with kin 2 counties over. Ada Boone didn't run out of anything that winter. Not wood, not warmth, not nerve. Here's what she actually did. And it's simpler than you'd expect from a woman raising a boy alone through a Kentucky winter. Every night around 10 o'clock, she banked that fire down tight. Every morning at 5, before Wesley's feet hit the floor, she fed the coals a single split of hickory, no more. That's it. That was her whole heating system. Her monthly heating cost that winter, by every account passed down in this family, was $0. Not low, zero. Now here's the part that ought to bother you a little. Fuel efficiency records pulled decades later showed that banked cast-iron box, run the way Ada ran it, put out more usable heat per pound of wood burned than that bookkeeper's oil furnace ever managed on credit. For 50 years, the folks selling furnaces called that furnace progress. It wasn't progress. It was a payment plan, and Ada Boone never signed one. What happened to Wesley Boone, and to 24 other things people in these hills used to just know how to do, is exactly what we're counting down today. Some of it got quietly dropped from building codes somewhere along the way. Some of it a university confirmed, inside the last 10 years, works better than the equipment you're still making payments on right now. We'll get to every one of it, in order, starting at 25. A couple of these are going to surprise you outright. Number 6 on this list. 3 separate states passed laws against it after 1975, and I'm not touching that one until we're most of the way down this list. Number 4. Costs less than a tank of gas and burns fuel you can scoop right off a sawmill floor for free. Number 3. The Smithsonian actually cataloged 61 surviving examples of it across 3 states. Stick with me. Before we get moving through the list proper, I want to tell you about something coming for this country that the evening news isn't going to mention until it's already sitting on your doorstep. It comes down to one number: 3 days. That's what a grocery store shelf holds in reserve for your family. Your grandfather's pantry held a whole winter, and the difference between those 2 numbers was never about money. It was about knowing what to do with what you had. I put 94 pages of that knowing into one book. Water, fire, curing meat without a refrigerator, canning without a pressure gauge from the store, and the plants growing wild that'll heal you right alongside the ones that'll kill you if you get them backwards. It's over at silasmercer.shop, link sitting right below this video. All right, back to the hollow, and back to the list. My name's Silas Mercer. I'm 7th generation up on Mercer Ridge, eastern Kentucky hill country, and my people put down roots on this exact ground back in the 1790s. Nobody's left since, not through 2 wars, not through the Depression, not through anything. Near everything I'm about to walk you through, my grandfather Eli copied by hand into a leather-bound journal before he passed at 94 years old. Eli made me swear to him, more than once, that the old ways wouldn't die with the last person who remembered them. This whole list, every one of these 25, is me keeping that word to a man who dug post holes with his bare hands into his 80s. Some of what's coming got written out of code quietly, one revision at a time. Some of it a university only confirmed a decade back. Works better than what's sitting in your basement right now. None of these 25 faded off because they quit working. Every single one of them still works today, right now, tonight, if you had to use it. They faded because a utility company, a lumber mill, or an appliance manufacturer got paid the day folks forgot how to do it themselves. That's not a mark against you, friend. It just means somebody out there got real good at selling convenience and real quiet about what it cost. So here's what I'd ask before we start moving. If something on this list changes how you look at the woodpile out back, or the drafty wall you've been meaning to fix for 3 winters running, say so when we get there. Hit that button down below, not for my sake, but because we're pulling knowledge back up into daylight together, and there's more of it coming, that plenty of folks would rather stay buried. 25 ways to heat a house, with no wire running to it, no meter spinning on the side of it, and no bill showing up in the mailbox come the first of the month. We start at 25, and we work our way down to the one single method that, if you understand it right, contains almost every other one on this list inside it. The real question by the end isn't what got lost, it's who got paid when we forgot, and how you take it back this winter. Number 25, the ash dam draft choke. Before your great-grandmother ever climbed the stairs at night, she'd rake the live coals into a tight pile at the back of the firebox and shovel plain cold ash straight over about half of them. She wasn't smothering that fire. She was starving it, just a little, on purpose. A 1/4-inch dam of ash cut the airflow down enough that those coals held red clean through the night, without burning through the woodpile. That trick cost her maybe 8 ounces of ash and a minute with a shovel. Nobody outlawed it. It just quit getting taught once the thermostat furnace showed up in the 1950s, and Sears started running ads that made tending a fire overnight look backwards and old-fashioned. A 2018 University of Tennessee Wood Heat Bulletin backs this up plainly. A properly banked stove holds combustible coals 8 to 12 hours. 8 hours of real warmth, 1 scoop of ash, and never once a bill in the mail. Number 24, layered wool wall curtains. Nail hung straight into the log. Depression-era families didn't have money for insulation bats, so they hung heavy wool blankets, sometimes 3 layers deep, right over the draftiest walls in the house, nailed at the top corners and weighted at the bottom with whatever was handy. That trapped a dead air pocket between the wool and the wall, and dead air is what actually stops cold, not the wool itself. A single wool blanket run this way could knock a noticeable chill off a room that faced straight into a Kentucky north wind. It cost whatever a used blanket cost at the general store, sometimes nothing if you had an old one already worn thin for bedding. This one didn't get outlawed either. It just got replaced, wall by wall, once fiberglass batting and drywall became standard after the war, and nobody thought to keep a blanket on the wall, once the wall itself did the job. Number 23. The soapstone bed warmer. Soapstone holds heat slow and steady, longer than most rock you'll find in these hills, and families kept a flat piece of it right in the coals of the evening fire. Come bedtime, somebody wrapped that hot stone in a piece of flannel and slid it down under the quilts to the foot of the bed. By the time you climbed in, that corner of the bed was warm enough you didn't mind the rest of the room sitting cold. A good soapstone slab held usable heat for 4 or 5 hours, long enough to get a body to sleep without shivering, and long enough that the fire itself could burn down low overnight. Farm families used the same trick for wagon rides and sleigh trips, wrapping stones for the children's feet on the way to church in January. Electric blankets pushed this one out of practice sometime in the 1950s, and most folks under 60 have never once held a warm rock on purpose. Number 22, the stone flue floor. Some of the older stone houses up in these hollows were built with a channel running under the hearth floor itself, so warm air off the firebox had to travel under the stone before it ever reached the chimney. That meant the floor you walked across stayed warm long after the flame itself had died down, and the heat that would have gone straight up the chimney did one more job first, warming your feet from underneath. Number 21, the earth-banked wall. Families built the north and west sides of a cabin right up against a dugout earthen bank, sometimes packing dirt and sod a full 3 feet thick against the exterior logs. Ground temperature stays remarkably steady no matter how cold the air gets above it, and that bank acted like a blanket the house never had to buy, absorbing the worst of the wind before it ever touched the wall your family was leaning against inside. This is the same principle a root cellar runs on, just turned sideways against a house wall instead of dug underground for potatoes. A properly earth-banked wall could cut heat loss on that side of a cabin dramatically, which meant less wood split, less time spent at the woodpile in a blizzard, and one less wall the stove had to fight against all winter long. Modern earth-sheltered building borrows this exact idea, just with better drainage than our people had back then. Number 20. The masonry heat bench. Families with a bit more stone to work with built a low bench of mortared rock running alongside the stove or fireplace, sometimes wrapping around a full corner of the room. That mass soaked up heat all day while the fire ran, then gave it back slow and steady long after the flame went out, the same way a sidewalk stays warm to the touch well after the sun's gone down. A stone bench built this way could keep a sitting room noticeably warmer through the coldest hours of the night, the ones right before dawn when a fire's most likely to have burned down to nothing. This is the direct ancestor of what folks today call a rocket mass heater, dressed up with a fancier name and a metal barrel, but running on the exact same idea your great-grandfather would have recognized without a second thought. Number 19. Straw and clay chinking. Log cabin walls need something packed between the logs themselves to stop the wind whistling through, and before store-bought caulk existed, families mixed clay dug from the creek bank with chopped straw and packed it into every gap by hand. It cost nothing but labor and dried hard enough to last a season or more, sealing a cabin up tighter than plenty of people would guess, just looking at rough-hewn logs from the outside. Number 18. The barrel stove conversion. Take an old 55-gallon steel drum, fit it with a cast-iron door and legs kit, and you've built a slow-burning stove that'll hold a load of split wood and throw heat for hours longer than a small firebox ever could. Depression-era workshops and hunting cabins ran on exactly this setup, because a drum cost next to nothing next to a manufactured stove, and scrap drums were sitting behind every filling station and mill in the county. A barrel stove's real advantage is surface area. All that curved steel radiates heat out in every direction at once, instead of just off one small firebox face, which means a single loading can warm a whole shop or cabin space that a smaller stove would struggle with. Plenty of hunting camps and workshops out here still run barrel stove kits today, and if you've never felt one going, it throws a different kind of heat than anything electric ever will. Number 17. The bedtime warming pan. A brass or copper pan with a long handle and a tight lid got loaded with hot coals from the hearth, then run quickly between the sheets of a cold bed right before anybody climbed in, sliding it back and forth to spread the heat evenly across the mattress ticking. It took less than a minute, cost nothing but a few coals that would have burned down to ash anyway, and it meant nobody had to climb into a bed cold enough to steal their breath. Number 16. The sod roof. Out on the prairie, and in some of the poorer hollow cabins alike, families layered thick-cut sod right over the roof boards, sometimes 8 or 10 inches deep, grass side up. That living layer of dirt and root held an enormous amount of insulating value, kept the heat that rose up through the cabin from just leaking straight out through thin board or shingle, and it cost exactly what it took to cut the sod and haul it up a ladder. A sod roof did have its downsides, mainly weight and the occasional leak once the sod dried out and cracked in a dry spell, which is part of why it fell out of favor once cheap tin roofing became available by rail. But for pure insulating value against a howling winter wind, very little roofing material available to a working family back then came close to what a good thick sod roof could hold in. Number 15. The heat riser flue. Some of the more clever chimney builders shaped the internal flue so hot exhaust air had to rise, cool against a baffle, and circle back down before finally venting outside, instead of shooting straight up and out taking most of your heat with it. That extra loop forced the fire to give up more of its heat to the room before the chimney carried the rest away into the sky where it did you no good at all. This same heat riser principle is exactly what modern rocket stove designs are built around, sold today as a brand new invention with a patent number attached to it. It isn't new. Chimney masons out here were shaping flues this way generations before anybody put a name on it or a price tag under it. A well-built heat riser could pull noticeably more usable warmth out of the same armload of wood than a straight-shot chimney ever managed. Number 14. The kitchen range as room heater. Most farmhouses built their whole daily rhythm around the kitchen range, because that cast-iron mass, once it got good and hot from cooking 3 meals, held onto that heat for hours after the cooking was done. Families didn't heat a separate sitting room in the evening. They just stayed in the kitchen, because the kitchen was already the warmest room in the house without spending one extra stick of wood to make it that way. This is why old farmhouse floor plans put the kitchen dead center of the house instead of tucked off to one side. Heat radiating off that range warmed the rooms, sharing a wall with it too. Whether that was planned on purpose or just noticed over a few winters, and built around from then on. Central heating, in the truest sense of the word, existed in these hills 100 years before anybody ran a duct through a wall. Number 13. The feather tick. A mattress and quilt stuffed thick with goose or duck-down trapped dead air against a sleeping body far better than most people give bedding credit for, which meant a bedroom itself didn't need to stay warm at all through the night, as long as what covered you did the job. Families let bedroom fires die down to nothing on purpose, saving that wood, and trusted a good feather tick to keep a body warm clean through till morning. Number 12. Newspaper and rag wall stuffing. Before fiberglass batting existed on any store shelf, families packed old newspapers, worn-out clothing, and scrap rags directly into the empty stud cavities of a wall before the interior boards went up. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't fireproof the way modern material is, but it did trap dead air, exactly the way any insulation works, and it cost whatever was already sitting in a rag bin or a stack of Reed newspapers nobody needed anymore. Old-timers here talk about tearing into a wall during a renovation and finding papers from decades back stuffed in there, dated and readable, a little accidental time capsule left by whoever built the place. It worked well enough that plenty of houses ran that way for 50, 60 years before anybody thought to tear the walls open and replace it with something manufactured and sold by the roll. Number 11. The hot rock foot warmer for travel. Before car heaters, before enclosed wagons even, families heated a flat stone in the coals, wrapped it in cloth, and set it on the floorboard of a wagon or sleigh for the children's feet on a long cold ride to church or to town. This same idea, almost unchanged, is exactly what a hot water bottle does today, just swapping stone for rubber and coals for a kettle, proving some ideas never really needed improving in the first place. Number 10. Hay bale attic insulation. Farm families with more hay than they needed for livestock some seasons packed the loose overflow straight up into the attic space above the living quarters, filling the joist cavities the exact same way modern blown insulation does today. It cost nothing beyond the labor of hauling it up a ladder, since it was already sitting in the barn as a byproduct of feeding animals through the year. Hay insulation did carry a real fire risk if it ever got too close to a stovepipe running through that same attic space, and more than one old cabin fire around here traces back to exactly that mistake. So anybody trying this today needs real clearance between any heat source and anything that'll burn. Used carefully, though, it held heat in an attic space about as well as anything a family could get their hands on without spending a dime. Number 9. The snowbank wall. This one sounds backwards until you understand it. Families deliberately pack snow up against the base of exterior walls during a hard freeze, sometimes 2 or 3 feet deep, because packed snow traps still air inside it almost exactly the way an igloo does, and that trapped air insulates a wall far better than open air sitting against bare wood ever could. The trick only works because snow, packed right, isn't actually cold in the way that matters. It's full of tiny air pockets that block wind and slow heat loss, the same physics that's kept people alive in snow shelters for longer than anybody's kept written records. A cabin with snow banked deliberately against its base through January and February lost noticeably less heat than the same cabin left bare to a January wind. Number 8. The storm porch airlock. Instead of one door opening straight from a warm kitchen into a freezing yard, families built a small enclosed porch, sometimes not much bigger than a closet, as a buffer space between the two doors. Every time that outer door opened, the cold air hit the porch first, not the house itself, and by the time the inner door opened, most of that shock had already been absorbed by the small trapped air pocket in between. Number 7. The one warm room strategy. Large farmhouses with 6 or 8 rooms simply couldn't afford to heat all of them through a hard winter, so families closed off every door that wasn't the kitchen or the main sitting room, sometimes stuffing quilts along the bottom of those closed doors to seal drafts, and let the unused rooms run cold on purpose. Every stick of wood went toward keeping one or two rooms genuinely warm, instead of spreading thin across a whole house. This meant sleeping arrangements shifted through the winter months too, with children and grandparents alike often bedding down closer to the kitchen stove during the coldest stretches, rather than in a bedroom that would have required its own separate fire. It wasn't comfortable by today's standard of every room running the same temperature, but it meant a family never once ran short of heat where it actually mattered. Number 6, and here's the one I told you we'd come back to, the outdoor wood-fired furnace. This is a firebox built entirely separate from the house itself, out in the yard, piped underground to carry either hot water or heated air straight into the home without a stick of wood or a spark ever crossing the threshold. Families running these could load a firebox once a day, sometimes even less in milder stretches, and heat an entire house plus the water heater off the same fire. Here's why 3 separate states passed restrictions against these after 1975. Done wrong, with green wood or a bad draft, an outdoor furnace can put out heavy smoke that drifts straight into a neighbor's yard, and enough complaints piled up in certain counties that lawmakers stepped in with emissions rules rather than teach folks to run one properly, with seasoned wood and a hot, clean burn. Done right, it remains one of the most efficient whole-house heating methods on this entire list. Number 5, the masonry heater. Sometimes called a Russian stove or a German mass stove depending on which part of this country your people came from. This design channels fire and smoke through a long internal maze of brick or stone mass before ever reaching the chimney, soaking every bit of that heat into thousands of pounds of masonry. One firing run hot and fast for an hour or two in the morning can radiate steady warmth through that same mass for a full 24 hours. That's the whole secret. You're not trying to keep a small flame burning slow all day and night, the way a box stove needs. You're trying to burn hard and fast once and let raw thermal mass do the slow releasing for you afterward. A masonry heater built right uses less total wood across a full day than almost any other method on this list, and homesteaders building off-grid today are quietly rediscovering exactly this design. Number 4, the mill scrap stove. Sawmills produce mountains of sawdust, bark, and corncob waste that most operations were more than happy to let anybody haul off for free, and a simple hopper-fed stove burns that scrap steady and clean, needing almost no tending compared to splitting and stacking cordwood by hand. Families living near a working mill could heat an entire winter for the price of gas to drive the truck over and shovel the load themselves. This is the direct ancestor of the pellet stove sold today for a few $1,000s. Running on manufactured pellets you buy by the bag from a store. The original version cost less than a single tank of gas for the whole season, because the fuel itself was scrap nobody else wanted. If you've got a working mill anywhere near you today, this same deal is often still sitting there for the asking, and almost nobody thinks to ask anymore. Number 3, the cast iron parlor stove. These were the ornate ones, nickel trim, little mica windows set into the door so a family could watch the flame flicker without opening it up and losing heat. Often the single most valuable piece of furniture a working family owned outright. Radiant heat off a good parlor stove could carry a sitting room comfortably through an entire evening on a modest load of hardwood. No ductwork, no blower, nothing but iron and fire doing the whole job. Dwayne here, Dry Creek Wrangler School. Let me ask you a question. Dwayne here, Dry Creek Wrangler School. Let me ask you a question. Plenty of these old parlor stoves, cleaned up and fitted with a new gasket, would out-heat a space heater, pulling 1,500 watts off your breaker panel right now, for exactly $0 a month. Number 2, the shared chimney design. Builders with limited stone and brick set 2 fireplaces back to back against one shared central chimney mass, heating 2 rooms, sometimes on 2 separate floors, off essentially 1 flue and 1 thermal core. Both fires warmed the same brick, and that brick held and radiated heat into both spaces at once, meaning a family got double the coverage without doubling the materials, or the labor it took to build two entirely separate chimneys. This central chimney placement also meant the heart of the house, structurally and literally, stayed warmest of anywhere inside it, which is exactly why so many old farmhouses out here were built with the chimney running dead center, rather than tucked against an outside wall like most modern builders do it now, for convenience of running the flue straight up through a shorter path. Center placement cost more lumber to frame around. It paid that cost back in heat every single winter after. Number 1, and this is the one that contains almost every other method on this list inside it. The cast iron box stove, banked right. Not just any box stove thrown in a corner and fed however somebody feels like feeding it. Banked, meaning coals raked and ash dammed, the way we talked about at number 25. Mass considered the way a masonry heater uses mass. One warm room, prioritized, the way families ran a whole house on one stove for generations. This is exactly the stove Ada Boone ran that winter in 1936, the one that outperformed her neighbor's oil furnace on paper decades later once anybody bothered to actually measure it properly. A cast iron box stove, run with attention instead of just fuel, is genuinely one of the most efficient heating tools ever put into an ordinary home, and it required nothing from Ada Boone except knowledge her own mother had already handed down to her years before that mine ever took her husband. Wesley Boone grew up in that house, warm every single winter. His mother was alive to bank that fire herself, and he carried the same habit into his own home decades later, without ever once paying a heating bill he couldn't afford. That's the whole list, 25 down to 1, and every single one of them still sitting there waiting, free, for anybody willing to learn it instead of buy it. I'd genuinely like to know which one of these your own family ran, because plenty of folks watching grew up with a version of this that looked a little different than how I laid it out. Maybe a different stove, a different trick for the ash, a different room they kept warm when the rest of the house went cold. Tell me which one down in the comments, and tell me who taught it to you, because that name matters more than mine does here. There's more of this sitting in that leather journal than fit into one video. Water and food storage methods that'll matter just as much as heat once you understand how the two connect. I'll be walking through those next, so stick around for that one. And if this channel's where you want to keep pulling this kind of knowledge back up into daylight, that button below is how you make sure you don't miss it.